Hello and welcome to Audio Jonopedia number 39. It is May 7th, 2014. Tomorrow is May 8th, 2014, as is the case with dates. And it's the date of the 2014 NFL Draft. And the St. Louis Rams have the number 2 overall pick in the draft, as well as the number 13 overall pick. So could be some interesting developments for the local NFL team. So I have somebody else on with me to discuss the draft, hopefully get some idea of what we think the Rams are going to do and what we hope the Rams are going to do. It's actually somebody that's never been on before. I wouldn't go so far as to say a friend of mine, but somebody that I do know who's on by the name of Nick. Nick, you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you for that very polite introduction. You're
Very heartwarming,
really
wasn't it?
professional, yes.
All right. Well, gotta keep things on an even keel here. You're not here because you're a friend. You're here because you can impart tremendous football knowledge on the people who are listening to this.
Well, I can only hope to meet
And
that.
well, that's what we're here for, is to provide education to the populace.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I mentioned before, obviously the Rams have 2 draft picks. The number 13 pick, which they earned through a mediocre 7-9 season, and the number 2 pick, which they earned from trading a different number 2 pick 2 years ago, in addition to 2 other first-round picks, a second-round pick, a third-round pick. I think that's all, isn't it?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, I think that trade's working out okay for the Rams. Agree or disagree?
I think I agree, but don't forget about ESPN declaring it over 2 years ago after RG3 had played a couple games. So you have to take that under consideration as well.
Yeah, there was an article going around the internet today. I don't remember. I think it might have been Deadspin. I don't remember who it was, but somebody. It was this long study basically pointing out what's been suggested by most people for years, which is that the optimal strategy for teams, all other things considered, is to trade down whenever possible.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, that's something that I expect the Rams to do again tomorrow. But since we don't really know where they would trade down to, it's kind of hard to evaluate who they should take, say, if they were number 8.
Correct.
I think at number 2, though, especially because really you only have to consider one player being drafted in this.
Mm-hmm.
The draft, of course, is a fun event because it's an objectively terrible event to watch. It's really dry and nothing happens, and you get all of the same information just by going on the internet, and you really listen to it on radio and get the exact same effect. But I do plan to watch the entire thing tomorrow, and I feel kind of bad about that.
And it's really boring just watching Mel Kiper say the same types of things over and over between every pick for 10 minutes every time for a full evening. It gets real old real fast.
Well, I remember whenever NFL Network started doing the simulcast of it,
Mm-hmm.
there's sort of this idea of, okay, we get a nice break from Kiper and McShay and Chris Berman and all of them, and then you realize that it's not that Kiper and McShay are doing a bad job with their televising the event. It just so happens that the event that they're broadcasting is awful.
Yes.
There's really no way to make it exciting. It's
just kind of a bad gig to begin with to be one of those drafts analysts, because they're probably not going to have 2 or 3 hours of original content to present over the course of an entire night.
I mean, you really just have to pray for trades. There's really, but I mean, they managed to do it, and it's really a very admirable job on their part. Even if it turns out boring, the fact that they're able to go the whole time without just going crazy and just yelling things out unprovoked, slightly impressive, I'd say.
Talking about the media, though, before we get into some players here, the big story now is that they're not going to be scooping picks on Twitter this year.
Yeah, I'm going to believe that when I see it. I'm not.
Yeah, me too. I think there's still going to be some other chatter around that they're going to be able to still know before it's actually announced.
Well, the only people they can really enforce on doing that are the NFL employees, NFL.com writers, NFL Network people, as well as the ESPN people.
Yeah.
So you're not going to hear from Schefter, you're not going to hear from Rich Eisen or something like that, but NFL's a pretty widely covered thing.
Yeah. If anything, you'll probably get a couple local guys who may know something, and then it'll get retweeted instantly because that's just what happens.
The question is if they're going to cut out people who are, instead of showing the people as they're about to get drafted.
On the cell phone. That bugs the crap out of me.
Yeah, like when you see Jadeveon Clowney picking up the phone whenever the Texans are going.
With a smile on his face.
I kind of hope it's a false alarm. I hope it's just... Because you got to figure that if you have Jadeveon Clowney's phone number, that's the perfect time to do a prank call, is to call right as, his expected draft position's heading up.
And you would have to wonder at that point, do they get a special phone with a special number only given out to teams, to kind of mitigate that risk of that happening?
That sounds absurd. It sounds very like 1984,
But it
but
might be
it
realistic.
sounds very NFL at the same time.
Yes, I agree.
So I'm not gonna disagree on that.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, as far as this draft's concerned, I mentioned Jadeveon Clowney. He's being projected by most people as the number one overall draft pick by the Houston Texans. And I've mentioned, as the video promises, primarily we're going to be talking about the Rams, but it's sort of hard to talk about the Rams without talking about that first pick. Do you think that Clowney's a good pick for the Texans? Is that who you would go with, or?
The thing about it is, Clowney is far and away, in my opinion, the most talented overall player in the draft. But as with the Rams, he isn't exactly a huge glaring need for the Texans. But I just don't think. I think the talent gap between him and whoever you're going to consider number two is just so wide that they almost just have to take him.
Yeah, the thing is, as much as Clowney's not a great fit for the Texans because they play a 3-4, because they already have J.J. Watt kind of playing the weird, like, hybrid defensive end linebacker sort of position for them, it's even less of a fit for the Rams. And if you go down the line, there's really not a lot of particularly logical fits, maybe up until number 6 or so.
No, and that's what I was thinking too, because if Houston goes crazy and picks Bortles or a quarterback or really whomever else, and Clowney is still sitting there at 2, I really think the Rams, if they're still at 2 by that point tomorrow evening, I really think they have to start getting on the phone like crazy to try and make a trade with what I would say probably Atlanta. But
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I have a hard time imagining that Houston will pick somebody and it not be Clowney. It wouldn't shock me if they traded the pick, but the fact of the matter is the value that they're going to get is going to be something, even if they're just trading down a couple of spots. And they're really not risking a lot because they can still pick up somebody later that they were going to get anyway. Like, for instance, if they were high on a quarterback other than Manziel, there's really not a lot of a threat of that quarterback being taken in the first few picks.
No.
So, even if you're only getting like a second-round pick in addition to going down, second-round pick's not nothing.
Correct.
And it could be a situation like with the Browns and the Vikings a couple of years ago where the Browns traded up one spot just so they could get Trent Richardson, which at the time seemed a little crazy because they were trying to leapfrog a team with Adrian Peterson, but at the same time, that team, there was also the threat of them trading with somebody else, and that's really where the psychology comes into play.
Yeah, and I feel like we hear this every year that the number 1 pick wants to trade down, they want to trade down, they want to trade down, and most of the time I feel like they just don't get the value they're looking for out of what a potential trade would be.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, when's the last time that the number 1 pick got traded? Was it Eli Manning? Was it that year?
I believe so, but even the pick itself wasn't outright traded. That was obviously a later.
Yeah. Well,
trade.
the Vic one was traded. That was outright traded, I believe, the day before the draft.
Yes.
And that ended up really being a great trade for San Diego because they got not only LaDainian Tomlinson with the number 5 pick, they got Drew Brees in the second round. They got somebody else of at least a role player status.
They were pretty good there for a stretch in the mid-aughts, so to say.
You have a good team when you have a 14-2 head coach getting fired. That's also when you know that your team's probably not going to ascend much higher because may have gotten a little greedy, but.
And you might be in trouble with your GM at that point, but
took him a few years to figure that one out. Yeah, but AJ Smith is now gone, and what do you know? They made the playoffs the next year. So
it's crazy how that works.
Funny, isn't it? Okay, so we agree though that if the Texans stay at 1, they're taking Clowney,
right?
They
pretty much have to take Clowney, in my opinion. Yes.
Can you see another team trading up to 1 to take somebody other than Clowney?
Like I alluded to earlier, I think the only team I could imagine doing something like that would be Atlanta. They just have such a glaring need at pass rush, really. And that's,
but they'd still be trading up for Clowney, though. Do you think anybody would trade up, say, for Khalil Mack or for Sammy Watkins or something like that?
Probably not. I especially don't see any team coming from below 10, but it just doesn't really work out for the teams 2 through 10.
Yeah, the thing is, if they're going to trade up to 1 from 2 through 10, you're going to have to give up a decent amount. But if you're looking at trading up from below that, you're looking at trading a huge amount. And maybe Clowney's worth it. And it seems that he's an acclaimed enough prospect that if somebody's going to do it for a non-quarterback, this might be it. But it's still an awful lot to
Yeah.
to risk.
And really, the last trade you saw like that is whatever year Atlanta traded up for Julio, and God knows what, I forgot what they traded that year.
They traded a lot, but
Yeah.
the trades ended up looking better in retrospect because the players that the Browns took with that trade ended up amounting to basically nothing.
Well, this is the Browns we're talking about. So.
Yeah, it's an unfair way to evaluate, but at the same time, the alternative would be pulling up the draft, looking at guys who could have been taken instead, and at that point, you're getting an unreasonably strong sampling of people. And
Yeah, it's just an exercise in futility, really.
yeah. Okay, so we mentioned Clowney. Now, in the unlikely scenario, though, that somebody other than Clowney goes number 1, if you're the Rams, do you try to trade the pick? Do you take Clowney? Do you pick somebody else?
Well, like I said, I would try like crazy. At that point, if Houston has picked and the Rams have their 10 minutes or whatever it is now, I would try like crazy to trade the pick to Atlanta. Or really, I would be taking any call at that point. But if you got down and you had to make the pick, there's no other option. You would have to pick Clowney at that point.
Yeah. Like I'm fine with the trade down scenario in theory, but it also depends on what they can get out of the trade.
Well, that's true too. I've always said if they're going to trade down to Atlanta at 6 or anyone else, they're going to have to get They're going to have to get a 15 first-round pick out of it. I wouldn't pick anything less than that.
Well, like there's sort of an unreasonable expectation because the last time the Rams had the number 2 overall pick, they got the number 6 overall pick, which is what Atlanta has now, plus 2 other first-round picks, a second and a third. That's not going to happen again.
And I just don't think that'll ever happen again. But if this is still the number 2 pick we're talking about. If you're going to trade into it, you're going to have to give up something. The Rams, obviously, like we said, they're not going to get another 2 first-round picks, or 3 really, if it counted the current year one. Yeah. But I think the conversation for me would start with the 2015 first-round pick.
Yeah, I would be fine with that. It would be a little you can't just trade down just because you don't have a need. You can't just say, "Oh, we'll take a 4th round pick" or something like that. It's crazy. But as far as the one concern would be that Atlanta kind of had a down year last year, so their 2015 pick may not be particularly high in the draft. But a 1st round pick's a 1st round pick.
This is true, and even if it's at 21, well, hopefully the Rams are picking even lower. But that's probably a dream.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, Clowney definitely is not a necessary player for the Rams. They have, in addition to having Robert Quinn, who's one of the best defensive ends in the game, they have Chris Long, who might be, one of the best, second best defensive ends. Like, there's really not a hole there. If there's one position that the Rams don't need, it's defensive end. It just so happens that Clowney is a completely transcendent sort of prospect.
Well, and more importantly, it would be kind of number 4 on my list of priorities because you've got, one side of the offense, another side of the offense, and then you've got the secondary on the defense and the defensive line, and on those, defensive line would definitely be, or the pass rush would definitely be number 4 on my priority list.
Yeah, with the possible exception of running back, who I would just put incredibly low on the priority list, just because I don't think running backs are that important, and because they just drafted a running back last year who looked really good. I can't think of a lower priority than defensive end. It's only for Clowney. If they don't take Clowney, they're not taking a defensive end in the first 4 or 5 rounds.
Well, and then you've got to think about if they take Clowney, you've got to think about playing time for other guys, or what are they going to do? Are they going to cut somebody? Are they going to trade a starter? What are they going to do? Because you're probably not going to have Clowney, Long, and Quinn on the field at the same time.
Maybe if you got one of them to move to linebacker, but at that point you got somebody out of position. They're not having as much value as they would at defensive end.
Yeah, and I don't know if any one of them could make that transition and not lose some of their value, or a lot of their value even.
I agree. Now, speaking of linebackers, Khalil Mack's another name that's up there as a prospect. For me, I'm hearing a lot about him. I never was really that wowed by him in college. I always thought he was a good player, but I never thought of him as being the kind of guy that you would take if you had no need for a linebacker. And I don't think the Rams have that much of a need for one. I wouldn't mind having another linebacker to go with Ogletree, but as much as teams are playing in the nickel formation at this point, do you really want to have one of them off the field for half the snaps in a game?
No, and that's the thing, is the problem. Going back to what I would need on defense, the Rams need to focus on the secondary. And if you're going to draft a defensive player with the number 2 pick, it needs to be in the secondary. And I just don't see a secondary player to take at number 2 that would be worth the pick.
there's really very rarely a secondary player that gets taken that high anyway in any
Yeah.
draft, much less this one. Like, I
Yes.
think Deion Sanders may have gone. I think he was top 5. I don't even think he was as high as 2 though. I'll look it up real quick. Or like Patrick Peterson had a lot of hype going with him, but even he I think was number 4.
Mhm.
It just doesn't really happen unless somebody is an absolute can't miss. It would come across as being a reach.
And I just don't see the fit. I don't think a linebacker two works for the Rams. Now, if they, as we have been saying, if they trade down and they're sitting at 6 or 7, and he's still there, well, then it becomes a little more intriguing.
Yeah, that's fine. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of guys that I hear as being a possibility at number 2 that I'm scared to death of, but at the same time, any of them, if they're available at 13, I'm all for them. It's
Well,
just a matter of what are you going to prioritize.
exactly. If you listen to Jeff Fisher, if he's saying there's 2 to 8 players that they're looking at, if they're able to trade down to 8, maybe that one is still there.
I mean, that's possible. Hopefully, I mean, I think that there's a decent chance that the Rams do trade down just because they've done it so much recently. They traded down twice in 2012. 2013, they traded up on one of the picks, traded down on the other pick. It's been wild, and I don't know if it's gonna be that crazy again, but it could happen.
They just really like having multiple picks. They would rather have more picks than higher picks. Is the kind of the gist I've gotten from
And
the.
I generally support that strategy, but the thing is, you can keep doing it, and you do like the Patriots have done, but then eventually you get to a point where you just have a bunch of guys who are okay. You don't have anybody that's really a star.
And the Patriots have had the luxury of having that Tom Brady guy that passed however many years, so they
And
ignore the quarterback position for 15 years.
most of the times that they've been trading down and just loading up on like defensive linemen and linebackers, and they haven't been particularly good in the front 7. So it's not like they're really accomplishing anything. It's just looking stylish, and because it's the Patriots, they get a lot of kudos for whatever they do.
Yes.
Now, as far as we've mentioned 2 front 7 defensive players, which really doesn't seem, in our opinions, to be too much of a need for the Rams. As far as another position, which you can get wildly differing opinions as far as whether or not it's a need, is quarterback. And it's kind of a weird thing because there's not really a lot of consensus as far as who the best quarterback in the draft is. It seems like Bridgewater has maybe slid a little bit down in that, but still disagreements as far as Manziel or Bortles. It seems like the preponderance of Rams fans who want a quarterback at 2 want Manziel. It seems like what's going on is that people really just want they want a savior. They want somebody that's going to come in and just change everything overnight rather than somebody who's just going to be a good quarterback. That's a little dangerous.
And there's this whole thing with entertainment value. Johnny had some of the best 2 years at Texas A&M that any quarterback had in college ever. And there's all these people in the media thinking that if they draft this guy, it'll sell tickets, it'll be entertaining, it'll revitalize the Rams fan base. And, with everything going on with, are they going to move back to LA, that's maybe slightly more of a factor than most Rams fans would want to admit, or even that ownership would want to admit. But to me, when it comes down to football only, I cannot possibly see how they could make that pick and be able to defend it.
Yeah, let me be very clear about something. Anybody who's listened to this for a while knows my feelings on Johnny Manziel. He is just my favorite college player ever. I just absolutely loved watching him play. I'm sort of conflicted on whether or not I think he's going to be a good pro, but I think he has a chance to be. With that said, the thing that I would find most entertaining as a Rams fan isn't a quarterback that runs around. It isn't a quarterback that plays in sort of his peculiar style. It would be the team winning. Like, there's nothing entertaining about Kurt Warner's style of play, but the team was winning, 13. They were going 13-3 in '99 or 14-2 in 2001. That was entertaining in and of itself.
And that's exactly my argument. And in fact, I said something about this earlier today. People are saying Manziel's going to sell tickets. He's going to be entertaining. And it seems like a lot of these people are ignoring what's even better than Manziel in terms of selling tickets and being entertaining, and that's winning football games.
Just overall, the thing is, unless you're talking about Jacksonville, there's really not a team in the NFL that should be focusing on selling tickets
No.
as like a separate institution from winning games, because it's not as though, Rams attendance is totally porous. And if you were going to just strictly go for selling tickets, you might as well go ahead and sign Tebow and start him and welcome in the media circus. Doesn't mean it's going to be effective. It doesn't mean that long term it's going to work out just because you get a splashy headline for a couple of days.
And as a diehard Rams fan, what would you rather see? Would you rather have them pick Johnny Manziel and go, say, 6-10 next year while getting 60,000 people in the dome for the first time since, I don't know, 2003? Or would you rather see them win games with Bradford and go 10-6 and have 60,000 people show up for the last couple games because they're in a playoff race?
Well, sort of a rhetorical question. I mean, definitely I would prefer to see the team succeed. I think there's people who there's definitely a blame towards Bradford as sort of the scapegoat for the Rams' struggles. And I'm not saying that he's totally without blame either, but at the same point, if you bring in Johnny Manziel, and this is true of any team, you're going to pretty much have to change your entire offense around, especially if you're the Rams, and they have just the most vanilla offense known to man. Why would you bring in somebody who basically is like a new version of Michael Vick, which is just running around a lot, making crazy plays? Maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, but it's certainly not what you would think of with the Brian Schottenheimer offensive style.
And I think something that doesn't get enough attention is if you take Manziel, are you just going to anoint him your starter and even think about cutting Bradford? What exactly happens after you take him?
I think you would have to. Like, I can't imagine. It seems ridiculous that you would take somebody number 2 overall in 2014 and not play him right away.
And it's at that point you have to cut Bradford pretty much.
Yeah.
You're not going to have a multi-million-dollar backup going.
I mean, the one thing that people sort of are ignoring is they're trying to make this as a case of, would you rather have Johnny Manziel or would you rather have Sam Bradford? You have a choice between Johnny Manziel or Sam Bradford, but it's not as though if you pick Bradford, you lose the number 2 pick. It's Bradford plus a really, really high-end prospect versus Manziel and cap room. Like, it's not quite as simple as people want to make it out to be.
No, but we're talking about Rams fans who don't like Bradford, and rationality hasn't exactly been.
Well, Rams fans. The thing is, I don't think it's something that's particularly a Bradford thing. I think it's something that's been going on for a long time with Rams fans. Rams fans also were not particularly fond of Mark Bulger for the vast majority of his time with the Rams, even when he was making Pro Bowls and leading the team to the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Rams fans were very quick to run Kurt Warner out of town. They were very quick to want to install Trent Green as a starter whenever he was productive when Warner was hurt. They were very quick to be angry at Tony Banks, and I don't really remember the Chris Miller era too well, but my guess is they weren't particularly fond of him either. Like, fans are just never going to be happy with the quarterback situation, even when the quarterback, in the case of Warner, is an MVP.
And they ran him out of town, and then that's kind of when the franchise started taking its downturn, and all of a sudden the same people that ran him out of town were wondering where the heck he was.
And then they ran Martz out of town, and things just went super swimmingly from there. So
it's been a great time with Mr. Jay Zygmunt. It was really a good era for Rams football.
It was a blast. It really was. But yeah, it does seem strange that all of the attention has gone to Manziel rather than to Bortles. And I'd rather have Manziel than Bortles, really, regardless of what team I have, because I just don't think Bortles is a great prospect.
Well, he's definitely more raw. He's definitely more of a project, in my opinion.
Yeah, but the thing is, Bortles, even at his peak, isn't generally considered to be a particularly exciting prospect. He's not considered to be somebody that's going to really take over the team and be the savior. Whereas people see that with Manziel, and they definitely don't see it with Bridgewater either. I think Bridgewater is the best quarterback of the group, personally.
And we haven't even touched on him, and I guess people now are thinking he's going to be around in the second round.
I was going to say, the Rams. If the Rams are going to take Bridgewater, take him in the second round at 40-something. I don't think he's going to last that long.
He was the kind of consensus number 1 overall pick just 5 months ago, and now he's fallen to the second round. What happened?
Yeah, I don't think he's like an Andrew Luck type of prospect by any means.
No,
but I
don't
do
think he ever
the best
was.
quarterback of the group.
Yeah.
I also think he's the safest, and I think that if he's still around at number 33, Houston would be crazy not to take Bridgewater. If they could manage to get Jadeveon Clowney at number 1 overall and Teddy Bridgewater as the number 1 pick in the second
They've got a pretty
round,
good draft.
that's gonna win every who won the draft sort of straw poll that there is. But as far as the Rams, though, it seems like if they're going to take a quarterback that high, it would be Manziel. I don't know that they're going to, but if they were to, it would probably be him.
And the thing about that is they would do it just as much, I think personally, I think they would do it just as much for the entertainment value or whatever else you want to call it. That's not just straight quarterback play. And as a fan that cares about winning football games, that scares me.
Yeah, the San Antonio Spurs sell out every single game they have, and they're one of the smallest markets in the NBA. They don't do it because they're exciting. They do it because they win games.
They are very, very boring.
The Rams could hand the ball to Zach Stacy every single play for 4 yards, and if they can get 4 yards every single play, they'd sell out every game, and people would love it.
And
it doesn't matter how boring it is if you win.
If you're winning Super Bowls with street players, well, it doesn't matter if you're winning Super Bowls.
Yeah. I think more likely, though, to go number 2 would end up being an offensive lineman. The question just becomes who the offensive lineman would be. Now, there's 3 prospects at offensive tackle who are considered the major ones. There's Greg Robinson, who both Kuiper and McShay are projecting the Rams will take at number 2. There's Jake Matthews, who some people have projected at number 2 as well. And there's Taylor Lewan, who's projected maybe a little bit later, but still like maybe a top 10 pick. Do you have any thoughts as far as, I guess, the idea of drafting an offensive lineman as well as which offensive lineman you would want of the group?
First of all, let me make it very clear. If the Rams remain at number 2, I don't want a lineman. I don't want a tackle because I think any one of those 3 guys could fit what the Rams need, but they could probably get one of the 3 at, 8, 9 maybe? Then
certainly, yeah. And they could probably they might be able to get Luan at 13 if they really wanted to wait. But
and if you're gonna pick at number 2, I'm still of the opinion, and the Rams have so many needs that if you're gonna stay at number 2, I think you have to take the best overall player at that point rather than we have a need at tackle, let's get this guy.
And do you have any preferences between the 3? I mean, Robinson's generally the highest rated prospect.
Between the 3, I think I would take Robinson. I think he probably has the highest ceiling. I think the safest pick would probably be Matthews because I think he would be the best next year. But I think, like I said, I think Robinson has the most potential to be one of the best tackles in the game for years to come.
Yeah, I agree that between the 3, Robinson is the best person to take at number 2 because if you're going to take a lineman thinking, oh, he can be a steady performer for a decade, well, that's nice, but you probably don't want to take that guy as the number 2 overall pick. It's really a bit of a reach. The main thing that I'm wondering, though, is where the idea that offensive line is a major team need came from. Like, I tweeted this a while ago. The Rams last year had this. It was the second fewest number of sacks that they allowed in the 21st century was last year. And I think that the least number that they gave up was like 1 fewer. Like the offensive line, even with injuries last year, and you still have Jake Long, you still have Roger Saffold, you still have Joe Barksdale. Unless you're planning on playing one of them at guard for a year, or moving Saffold to guard, I guess. But what are you gonna do with Barksdale?
I think one of the big fears among fans is that Jake Long had his injury very late in the year, and generally that's seen as a 12-month or a 10-month injury, and I think a lot of fans are unsure what they're going to see in Jake Long in August or September or even October, and he had bouts of inconsistency last year. So I think fans are they think they really need that tackle because they're really unsure about what they're going to get out of Jake Long next year.
Yeah, I don't think the injuries are an unreasonable concern, especially when you have Jake Long as the top offensive tackle on the team. I definitely agree that the Rams should try to get depth at offensive line, but do you want to make a depth pick at number 2?
No,
do you even want to make
Do
you even want to make one at 13 for that matter, but definitely at 2?
No, and depth isn't worth or trying to mitigate an injury risk at number 2 would just be a poor personnel decision in my opinion.
I agree with you there. We are being way too congenial during this. We need to I think the next thing you say, I'm going to just angrily disagree with, just to make things more interesting.
We should start talking about FIP or something at some point.
Well, we got to keep it a little football focused
Yeah,
here. But the next player on the agenda is we have Sammy Watkins, the wide receiver out of Clemson. I will disagree with whatever you say, but go ahead.
I don't think we should take him because I don't like Clemson football.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, so I get to defend him now instead, right?
Yes, I believe that's how it works.
Okay, Sammy Watkins. And let me see if I can convince you with this.
Okay.
Sammy Watkins has been an All-American for 3 straight years, including his true freshman year out of Clemson. Anybody who's watched him play in the last 2 Orange Bowls has seen tremendous production. The Rams, while they did sign Kenny Britt to be sort of a bigger receiver, have had a tendency in recent years of drafting guys like Chris Givens, like Tavon Austin, guys who are smaller, quicker guys, but aren't necessarily equipped to play every down. At this point, Austin Pettis is still probably considered to be a starter for this team, but because Tavon Austin's not really big enough to be. But you get Sammy Watkins in there, and he's going to be able to jump in there right away and be a superstar. And let me pull up exactly what Sammy Watkins' age is compared to just mentioning that he was a 3-time All-American, because I don't believe he's 21 yet. I believe he's still actually 20.
Yes, I looked this up earlier today. I believe he's still only 20.
He's 20? Okay. I would like to hear you now explain why either you now agree with me because I'm such a great convincer, or why I'm wrong.
In all seriousness, here, in my opinion and everyone's opinion that I talk to about football on Twitter, this is the obvious pick. The Rams have been lacking this type of receiver for God knows how long. Pretty much ever since Bruce and Holt left town, they haven't had this type of receiver. And for the Rams, this is the one player that they really need to make their offense that much better. They have the slot guys. They have the running back. As we talked about earlier, they have the offensive linemen for the most part. They could probably use a bit more depth, but they're missing that one big outside receiver who can just be depended on for 50, 75, 100, 125 yards per game and is going to beat most cornerbacks in the league. It's just, to me, it's such an obvious pick here if they stay at 2.
Okay, so what you're saying is that I convinced you, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Here's a line from Sammy Watkins' Wikipedia page, which is always correct. He was an AP first-team All-American as a true freshman. 3 other players have done that: Herschel Walker, Marshall Faulk, and Adrian Peterson.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm convinced on their careers, but I think that's probably a good sign for his.
1 Hall of Famer, 1 future Hall of Famer, and probably the best college football player ever. So, yeah, pretty good group.
Yeah, he's a select company, I would say.
He also, as far as his workout, had as fast of a 40-yard time as Tavon Austin, who was drafted in the top 10 solely because of speed. So he might be okay.
Yeah, I think he would just fit so well in the, well, maybe not fit so well in the offense, but he fits what the Rams really, really need. And if you draft him, it makes everyone on the offense better. It would open up running lanes for Stacy. It would force the secondary to focus more on the wide receivers and less on blitzing. Bradford would be more protected, and it would fit guys' roles better. You would be able to put Givens or Britt or whoever at number 2. Tavon would be in the slot. It would just, there's a lot of talent to go around if you draft that guy.
There seems to be a little bit of a hesitance among fans based on the idea that they've drafted a lot of receivers in recent years. Not only Tavon Austin last year, but taking Brian Quick with what was essentially a late first-round pick, taking Chris Givens, having just a really young receiving core, having the veteran of the group be, 26 years old maybe?
Yes.
It sort of reminds me of when people criticize the Lions for taking Calvin Johnson because they'd taken a lot of receivers previously. I don't think Sammy Watkins is as good as Calvin Johnson,
No.
but I don't think that's really a slight on him. But if you have a guy that you're this confident in and that everybody across the board seems to think is going to be a star, and it's at a position where you could really use somebody, I'd go that route.
I just think they have to take him. He's probably not going to be Calvin Johnson, but he might be the most slam dunk receiver pick since Calvin Johnson. His ceiling is probably something like Dez Bryant, and that's still kind of the type of player the Rams really need.
He's got a little bit of a Julio Jones in terms of his size. Like he's not one of the big superhuman guys like Calvin or like AJ Green or something like Dez, but he's bigger than what they have, and that's something that they need.
Yes.
You can't just depend on lining Jared Cook up as a receiver and hoping for the best of luck. You need to have somebody that has, a pedigree of being a really talented, strong receiver.
But Jared Cook is a matchup nightmare, so I'm not sure why the Rams didn't think of lining him up at wide receiver more often last year. It was really quite confusing.
Nightmare is a good word I would use to describe a majority of Jared Cook's games last year, indeed. Now, as far as other later picks, there's a lot of sensing that the Rams at some point are going to draft a quarterback, which I'm personally very much in favor of. I wouldn't do it, in the first round, but to me, drafting a quarterback that you don't even intend to have as a starter at any point is worthwhile in the later rounds because you're probably going to play him, and the amount that he's going to contribute to the team is going to be worth more than if you draft some, offensive guard who may or may not get a spot start every once in a while.
And that's really what I would like to see them do in the third round, the fourth round. Probably not the second, but I would really like to see them to get maybe kind of a project quarterback, someone they can bring into camp and work alongside and kind of see what they have to have some sort of option either going forward or some sort of quarterback that they see maybe has a little bit of potential on the roster.
Yeah. I mean, Bradford, as much as we've more or less defended him, he does get hurt a lot, so it's silly to not have a contingency plan.
That's pretty much the one valid defense, or excuse me, one valid reason that the Bradford haters have is he has spent the majority of 2 of his 4 seasons on injured reserve.
True. Are there any particular quarterbacks that you're interested in, or just somebody?
Aaron Murray is one that strikes me as one that would have potential from Georgia, and he was at Georgia forever, and he started forever, and we watched him for a long time in the SEC. So I think he had his injury, but I think he's the best. He would be a good pocket passer and someone they could probably grab maybe in the third round.
Yeah, I've always liked Aaron Murray as well. One name that I've heard probably isn't even going to get drafted is Connor Shaw out of South Carolina. I mean, maybe he doesn't quite have the arm strength, but if you're looking for somebody who's in sort of that Manziel mold of, just being adored by his teammates, being able to make plays on his feet, it seems like, if you're going to use, a 6th or 7th round pick on a quarterback, he seems like a guy that I would think would make the team and would at least have a chance of being something. You may not. I wouldn't be counting on him to be a long-term solution or anything, but I can't imagine what could go wrong with that one.
He would at least add some depth to the position. If he flames out, he flames out. You've wasted a 6th or 7th round pick, and most of them go to waste anyway. So there's really it's really not it's a no lose situation really.
Okay. And as far as the number 13 pick, we're not going to talk too much about that just because there's so much that can happen before that you really can't predict. Mel Kiper Jr. has the Rams taking Clinton Dix, the safety out of Alabama. Todd McShay has them taking Odell Beckham out of LSU, the receiver. Obviously, we both want them to take Sammy Watkins, so we're probably not going to want them to take Beckham as well. What are your thoughts on Clinton Dix? Would you be happy with that pick?
I think I would be happy with Clinton Dix. Obviously, it all depends on what they do with the first pick and if they trade or whatever else they do. But I think if it came down to it and they've taken Watkins, which, like you said, we both want them to do, I would be okay with Clinton Dix. If the cornerback is there from Michigan State, I think they would have to take a look at him. But at some point, you're going to have to get secondary help, and usually mid to upper teens is usually a good place to find secondary help in the draft.
Yeah, I like Denard, the Michigan State cornerback you mentioned before, quite a bit. I don't know whether he's going to be available or not. I've heard some projections of him going a little higher, but any of the guys we've mentioned, basically, I would consider at that pick, even if they're not particularly a fit. Maybe not the quarterbacks, but as far as any of the linemen.
And like you said, they might be able to get the guy from Michigan at 13. It's just it's really hard to plan.
He actually seemed to get at least as much praise as Robinson or Matthews whenever he was in college. I'm really not sure. I think he might have gotten arrested. He has some sort of issue. Let's check on what happened with it. Yeah, I'm not seeing any particular reason for him to have fallen, but I don't know, I could just be forgetting. Any other players you want to talk about? Anything else draft related?
I don't think so. I was going to mention something a little bit earlier, but it kind of slipped my mind.
All right. Well, that'll just fall into the abyss then. Anything you want to plug? Anything like that?
No, I don't think so. Not at this time.
You want anyone following you on Twitter?
No, I think I'll save that for next time.
All right. So obviously you won't know where to find Nick on Twitter, so that'll be too bad. You can, of course, follow me at JohnJF125. I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit, so
So I will cut in and tell you guys that you can follow me at Grobot05. I was formerly Grobot20, and I have the best Twitter account on the web.
yes, you do have a Twitter account on the web. Thank you very much for listening, everybody.